This is a Great Unclean One. He's my favourite Warhammer miniature, and I'm going to tell you why. He's got a cool pose, a silly little face, and amazing potential for conversions. Here's a few I've made earlier. He's a chunky boy. And you know who else is a chunky boy? This guy, Mr. Oogie Boogie from my favourite film, The Nightmare Before Christmas. And would you look at that? It's October, it's Halloween time, the stars have aligned. I'm going to make the perfect mashup of Oogie Boogie and the Great Unclean One. My name's Hatty, you're watching Midwinter Minis, and this video has been sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor Martyr. And it's my first video. Let's go! Now, I love Halloween. I have ghosts in my house all year round. One of my cats is literally called Pumpkin. And going hand in hand with that is my love for The Nightmare Before Christmas. Look at all this stuff I have! Normally I don't do a lot of planning when it comes to my painting projects, but since this one's being filmed, I thought I'd bring you along on my train of thought. Hop on board! Hoot hoot! Even though the two characters have pretty similar body shapes, this is still quite a big conversion and it might still seem quite intimidating. But hopefully along the process you'll see that it's not actually such a big deal, and if you wanted to, you could probably do it too. The challenge here for me is going to be making him look like Oogie Boogie while still being recognisably a Great Unclean One. So I want to keep his face, his pose and small shape details like his horn, obviously both Great Unclean One and Oogie Boogie. So, the first thing I'm going to do is sketch out what I want it to look like, and I'm going to do that over this picture of the Great Unclean One that I've printed out, and I'm going to white ink out all of the bits that I don't want, and draw on new details. So hopefully the finished model is going to look something like this. And after that I assembled the core body bits. Since Mr. Oogie Boogie is a sack filled with bugs, I wanted to replicate that in a Great Unclean One way, and the Great Unclean One has nurglings. So I cut away the bits that I don't need using a rotary tool and then arranged some nurglings using blue tack, and I think that looks pretty good, so we're gonna do it. Now that I've cut that away, the inside of him will probably be visible between the nurglings, and I want to cover up all these shiny little lumpy bits. So I sprayed it black and then applied black 3 from Culture Hustle. It's super matte and looks and feels like velvet. It's a little bit fragile, but since it's not being touched, it's going to be fine. So as I said, I wanted to keep some of the Great Unclean One's recognisable shapes, so I cut off both of his horns and decided I only wanted to use one as the Oogie Boogie hood. And then I took some time trimming off all the little horny bits and tentacles around his body to make the sack less lumpy. And then for nothing but my own pleasure, I cut off his nipples. So all the individual bits are looking good, and I'm going to stick them together. Now, commitment time! Before I added the bottom, I stuck the nurglings in place using super glue, which was deeply fiddly, and I absolutely coated my fingers in glue. And then I stuck the horn on the top of his head to use as the hood shape. I then used a hobby drill and a knife to bore out his eye holes and his mouth a bit more to make them deeper and darker. Hee hee hee, look how silly it looks from the back. Now, the Great Unclean One has his belly just dragging across the floor, but Oogie Boogie has dainty little sack feet and his tummy doesn't touch the floor. So Guy made me some sprue stilts and I stuck them under his legs. Now he's ready for sculpting! But I don't really know what I'm doing here, so I'm going to experiment. I'm going to be using Milliput, which if you don't know is a super easy to use 2-part epoxy that bonds to plastic and it dries in a couple of hours. Now, Oogie Boogie is made of Hessian sack sort of material, which would be an absolute pain in the bum to sculpt. So my plan is to maybe press something into Milliput instead. I've smushed out this little piece of Milliput onto some card, and I've also gathered a lot of different textured things to try and get that Hessian look. I tried some fabrics, I tried some mini strainers, some sieves, and some actual Hessian, some of which left behind some hair, but I'm not really mad at the results. Also, because I had a couple of inches left, I tried a knife and a weird sculpting tool and a toothbrush, but they all looked garbage. Now it's dried, it's time to paint it, and I didn't bother with the ones that I didn't really like the look of. I just did a base coat and a dry brush, and I think it's between the big strainer and the coarse Hessian, so we'll see which works best on the model. But before I even think about putting any of that texture on, I'm going to sculpt his basic shape, so his feet, his arms, and a little hood. Since the Great Unclean One's belly is normally dragging along the floor, there's no bottom sculpted onto him, so I just cut out a bit of card and painted it black to stick under it. You have to use water to stop milliput sticking to you and to get all those nice smooth shapes. And of course, this is when Guy decides to post a story of me on Instagram.
What are you doing there, Hatty?
Don't look at me. Anyway, then I decided to flesh him out and make his hood, which looks ridiculous, like a little nightcap. I love it. Now it's time to put his sack skin on. Oh god. For this I'm going to put a layer of milliput on, make it nice and smooth and moist, and then section by section I'm going to press on the texture. Now I really wanted this mini sieve to work because the texture is amazing, but as I did it I found it really hard to get it into the curves and recesses, so I just rubbed it out and started again. Luckily with milliput you can just wet your finger, smooth that out and try again. So I'm going to use this rough Hessian instead. Yeah, that's so much better with the Hessian. Just wrap it around. It's so bendable. Beautiful. I did notice at this point that the Hessian was leaving little hairs around him, so he looks kind of like pork scratching. Now, just to do the rest. Bit by bit, bottom to top, but the Hessian did start gumming up, so I did have to go to the shop and buy a whole meter of it, which is way too much. Now, I'm gonna be honest, one of the things that puts me off trying stuff like this is how weird it looks mid-stage. I mean, look at his face, that's absolutely terrifying. But don't throw it in the bin just yet, this is one of the times when you just have to trust the process. Now, let's do the face. It's probably the most important bit to sell the Unclean Boogie. Oh wait, no, that sounds gross. Let's just make these little sausages to flesh out the shape and press them on, smooth them out, and press on the texture. It's super easy to do this using the silicone tools to just push the shapes where I want them and then to add the little mouth details, rather than trying to jam my fingers in there and ruining the shape. Oh, look how gross and hairy this has made my thumb. Annoyingly at this point his head did fall off, but let's just quietly glue that back on and pretend that never happened. Oh no, now he has a plastic sports bra. Ah, this is bad. Let's cover up his norks. And let's do his tummy the same as his mouth. I like the little seam look to it. Just add these little sausages again and smooth them in, add those little details. And with the final texture, it's starting to look like an actual thing. Now, Oogie Boogie in the film has a seam all the way around his body, which was one of the things I was most worried about sculpting. But actually, just drawing on where I wanted it and then adding more of those little sausages, pressing in that texture and then using that silicone tool again, worked really well. It was time consuming, but it was actually pretty easy. Yeah, he looks so good. I'm so proud of me. This has been pretty tedious in places, but I think it's really worth the effort. He looks so cute, but he's not only chunky, but also heavy. Milliput is not light. Let's see how much he weighs. 367 grams, wow. Or some ounces, I don't know. Time to paint it. But before we do that, time for a quick word from our sponsor, Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor Martyr. Take it away, Guy.
Oh, thanks, Hatty. So yeah, the kind folks over at Nacon asked us to spread the word that Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor Martyr is not just available on PC anymore, and the Ultimate Edition just saw its console release. So now you can strike fear into the enemies of the Imperium on your Xbox Series X or PS5. Now, 40k games tend to be a little bit hit or miss, but thankfully this one is a hit, with a positive rating over on Steam, and I love that it features pretty deep character customization and skill trees so you can play the way you want to. Not only that, this console edition has been tweaked to take full advantage of next-gen consoles, including updated visuals, lighting, and a streamlined interface to make spreading the good word of the Imperium even more disgustingly fun. So if you reckon that sounds like your bag, follow the link in the description to get all the info you need. And we've actually snuck 2 free game codes into this video too. So if you're eagle-eyed, you might have spotted the Xbox code in the first half of the video, and the PS5 code is coming up in the second half of the video, so keep your eyes peeled. Thanks again to Nacon and Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor Martyr Ultimate Edition for sponsoring this video, and back to you, Hatty.
Thanks, Guy. Now back to painting. Oogie Boogie in the film has two looks. One in normal, just light beige Hessian, but in other scenes he's green and glowing, and I really want to try and make that effect. So we bought a few glowing and UV reactive paints to try out on him. First I primed Oogie Boogie's body in black, and then I airbrushed the body in XV88. I'm still new to airbrushing, and oh god, that was so much, and it's turned him bright green, but 2 or 3 layers later, he looks pretty solid. Next I dry brushed him with Talon sand. Dry brushing is where you remove almost all the paint from your brush and then lightly brush it on to catch all the texture, but not like this. I quietly cleaned that off and started again. Whoopsie. Welcome to 20 minutes of me embarrassing myself. Next I mixed in some pale sand for another dry brush. I'm going to focus this dry brush on key areas like his face, his tits and his ass. And then I airbrushed some thinned down wildwood into deep recesses to bump up the contrast in his armpits, deep folds and his butt crack. Then a final dry brush of pale sand on the highest areas and the most prominent sections. Then I repainted the inside of the stomach seam with black. And while I had the black out, I thinned it down and added it to all the lines in the seams and patted all the excess off with kitchen paper. That looks great, I'm really happy with it. Now let's ruin it. As I said, I wanted to get the vibe of the UV fun times in the film, so let's paint the Nurglings in crazy colours. We got these cool fluorescent paints from Green Stuff World, which also glow under black light. Pretty cool. They are really thin though and not very good for base coating. So I decided to base coat the Nurglings with these AK Intense paints and Citadel. Very big and bold, the brightest versions of all their base coat colours. Then I added a recess shade to all the Nurglings using complementary contrast paints thinned with Lahmian Medium. Then I added little details like the tongues, teeth and the eyes. Wow, they look awesome! Now let's try and make Oogie Boogie glow too. This glow-in-the-dark paint we got from Hobbycraft looks really quite gritty, so I'm going to try and use this lip powder from Culture Hustle instead. The pot glows in the dark when we turn the lights out at the end of the day, so I've got a pretty good feeling about it. I mixed it up following the instructions, equal parts powder to medium, and thinned it like a paint. Wow, this really glows. Check it out under UV. When I tested it out, it went on quite transparently. Hopefully, nice and thin enough to not ruin the paint job underneath. So I tried overbrushing it on the model, and now let's have a look at him under UV. Oh no, it looks awful, grainy, splotchy, terrible. Let's try being heavier with the overbrush, but I'm worried about ruining the paint job so far. I've tried again and somehow it's worse. I kind of panicked here, I couldn't figure out a way to fix it, so I decided to just cover up all the powdery bits and try again on a different project. Maybe we'll make a dedicated video on UV paints in the future. I definitely need to do some more experimentation. Well, that was embarrassing. Good job no one was watching. Anyway, back to where we were. Let's highlight those Nurglings and not use those UV paints because there's not much point now. I'm just going to do a touch here and there. They're quite tucked away in his tummy, so they don't need much. And now let's do that base. Oogie's lair in the film has a really cool roulette wheel. It's very funky, but maybe too distracting to use as a base with all those little details, so I'm going to make a simplified version of it. I cut out some basic roulette wheel shapes from chipboard and then cleaned the edges with an emery board and then stuck them down with dots of PVA and superglue, and to stop it from shifting around I weighed it down while it dried. And once it was dry I sprayed it black and sponged on grey to add some texture to the recesses. I was going to do alternating colours, maybe purple and red, but I made 7 sections, so we'll have to add some random green ones too, and I've marked them out here so I wouldn't forget which ones they were. I did a few layers of base coats and they're looking nice and bright, and then I sponged on some highlight colours to add some texture. I also dry brushed with the same colour with a bit of added white to it to make the edges pop a bit. Now I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't really keen on how this looked at all, and I thought it was way too bright and beach bally, but Guy suggested I add a scratchy texture to it to give it a more Tim Burton-y look. So I mixed the base colours with Null Oil, made it super thin, and then added these scratchy brush strokes radiating out. And added the same strokes in a highlight colour to add some lighter streaks. That's a bit better, I can probably live with that. Onto the dice! Oogie in the film has these really funky little, almost tiki style skull dice, and we actually found a link to them online, which I'll pop into the description, and our wonderful friend Steve printed them out for us. Is there anything he can't do? I base coated these black with a brush because I think they'd blow away if I tried to spray them, and then I put Mephiston red on the faces. I then scarlet, did a more focused dry brush with AK Deep Orange, and then mixed in a bit of AK Deep Yellow for a final dry brush on the corners. Now for the traditional final Warhammer step, a black base rim. I actually lied, we need to stick him together. Because Oogie Boogie is so heavy, I'm going to pin him to the base, so I cut up these paper clips and used the straight bits. I drilled out some holes in the base of his feet and then poked them into paint to mark out where he'll stand on the base. I then drilled out these holes using Guy's Wow Stick. Oh wait, no. Added super glue to those bits and I stuck him on. And then with another tiny dot of super glue, stuck those dice in place. And after a nice awkward wait, he's ready for a matte varnish to take the shine off random recesses and glue blobs. And now it's time! Do you want to see him? It's time for the big reveal. Ah, look at my boy! I think he looks really awesome. I'm really proud of his little face and his weird tentacles and his chunky little bum. I'm still not 100% convinced by the base though, and if I have time in the future, I might redo it. But overall, I would say mission accomplished. I think he looks like a good crossover between Oogie Boogie and the Great Unclean One. Also, hilariously, this could technically still be used in an official Games Workshop tournament. And now for a final weigh-in. Let's see just how chunky this chunky boy is. 414 grams! Wowie! That's more than 14 ounces. This thing is almost a pound. He is one big boy. Now I'm really happy with this. I love converting the Great Unclean One, and I want to do more of him in the future. If you have any cool conversion ideas, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know your thoughts. I am annoyed that the UV didn't work, but I am keen to try it again, and at Midwinter Minis we keep our mistakes in, so you can hopefully learn from them as well. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my first video. Thanks again to Warhammer 40,000 Inquisitor Martyr for sponsoring this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye!